Asbestos inspections are required whenever there's a pre-renovation or pre-demolition of any structure, whether it be a commercial building, 4 stories or 4 or greater units in a building, commercial, healthcare, schools, whatever the building is. If there's being a renovation being done or it's going to be demolished, the EPA federal regulations require an asbestos inspection to be done to ensure that there's no release of asbestos into the air during the demolition or renovation process. It does not matter the age of the building. New construction, old construction, it does not matter the age. The EPA specifically states that there is no age requirement of when asbestos inspections are needed. Now, in some cases, if the building was built and the architect and the engineer and the construction personnel all have documents that show that the materials are free of asbestos, then there can be a waiver from the EPA saying you don't need an asbestos inspection done. But unless you have that documentation, you still need to have a pre-renovation or pre-demolition asbestos inspection according to the EPA. Asbestos is still being used today. That's one of the biggest myths. Asbestos is still being used in many building materials today, roofing products, caulkings, sealants, adhesives. So just because it's new, it doesn't mean that it does not contain asbestos. It is rarer to find asbestos in building materials today, but it's not impossible. The reason why it was used is because it is abundant, it's relatively cheap, and it could be used in so many ways. Tensile strength, it could be stretched, it could be woven into building materials, and known for its fireproofing capabilities, heat resistance, water resistance, chemical resistance. So it doesn't break down. That's why it's dangerous. When those fibers break down and they get so microscopic that they get into someone's lungs, the body cannot rid of those fibers. So that's when it can cause some asbestos-related diseases like asbestosis, lung cancer, mesothelioma. So it gets deep into the lungs. Usually it's from high levels of exposure over long periods of time, but there are some times where there is no dose-response relationship to asbestos, so it's still it can present a risk. The regulations do not apply to single-family homes or residential structures that have less than 4 units in it. So homeowners are not required by federal regulations or state regulations to test for asbestos, but it's generally in their best interest to contact a qualified professional who is licensed, and there are licensing requirements for asbestos, to say, hey, do we have asbestos? Are we going to be touching anything that has asbestos in it? Which, again, if it's not cleaned up properly and not done properly, those asbestos fibers can stay in the house for extended periods of time, thus potentially causing a risk of exposure to airborne asbestos fibers, which you're not going to be able to see. But homeowners are not required by any regulations if they are doing the work themselves. But if they're having a contractor come in and do work in their house, those contractors still have to abide by both OSHA regulations to protect their workers from exposure to asbestos and any other applicable regulations when it comes to asbestos.